On a crisp autumn morning in downtown San Francisco, tech billionaire Richard Chen found himself walking through the financial district, his mind preoccupied with his latest business acquisition. The morning fog was just beginning to lift, revealing the gleaming glass towers that pierced the sky. Richard had everything money could buy: a successful tech company, multiple homes across the globe, and a fleet of luxury cars. Yet something felt missing in his life. As he turned the corner onto Market Street, heading to his favorite coffee shop, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Sitting on a worn cardboard box was a homeless man who made Richard's heart skip a beat. The man could have been his twin, the same high cheekbones, the same slightly crooked nose, even the same distinctive widow's peak in his salt and pepper hair. The only difference was that while Richard wore a tailored suit worth thousands, this man wore layers of tattered clothing. The homeless man didn't notice Richard at first, too focused on trying to keep warm in the chilly morning air. Richard stood there, frozen, as businesspeople streamed past him on both sides. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at an alternate version of himself, what might have been if life had dealt him a different hand. As if sensing someone's gaze, the homeless man looked up. Their eyes met, and both men seemed to recognize the uncanny resemblance. The homeless man quickly looked away, embarrassed, but Richard couldn't move. His mind raced back to his own childhood in a working-class neighborhood, where his single mother had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. One missed paycheck, one serious illness, and they could have ended up on the streets. Richard approached slowly, careful not to startle the man. "Would you like to join me for coffee?" he asked, gesturing to the shop behind them. The homeless man, who introduced himself as Tom, hesitated before nodding. As they sat in the warm cafe, Tom's story began to unfold. Tom had once been a successful software engineer in Silicon Valley. He had a beautiful family, a promising career, and a comfortable life. But then came the dot-com crash of the early 2000s, followed by a devastating cancer diagnosis for his wife. The medical bills piled up, and despite working around the clock, Tom couldn't keep up. After his wife passed away, he spiraled into depression. One misfortune led to another, and before he knew it, he had lost everything: his home, his savings, and his will to start over. As Richard listened, he felt a profound connection to this man who could have been him in another life. Tom's story wasn't just about bad luck, it was about the fragility of success and the thin line between prosperity and poverty. Richard thought about all the times in his own life when he'd nearly failed, when he'd almost given up. The only difference was that he'd had a support system, people who believed in him, and sometimes, just plain luck. The coffee grew cold as they talked, and Richard made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He saw in Tom not just a man who needed help, but a mirror reflecting the randomness of fate. This chance encounter on a foggy San Francisco morning was about to become the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would challenge Richard's understanding of success, purpose, and the true meaning of brotherhood. But as the morning wore on and their conversation deepened, neither man could have predicted the series of events that were about to unfold. Their story would soon capture the attention of millions, challenging society's perceptions about homelessness, success, and the bonds that connect us all. And this was just the beginning. The next few days after their coffee shop encounter were a whirlwind of activity. Richard couldn't stop thinking about Tom and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. After several sleepless nights, he made a decision that would raise eyebrows among his board members and friends alike. He was going to help Tom rebuild his life, not with handouts, but with opportunities. Richard's first step was to find Tom proper accommodation. He owned several apartment buildings in the city through his real estate investments, and he arranged for Tom to stay in a modest but comfortable one-bedroom unit. However, when Richard returned to Market Street to share the news, Tom wasn't at his usual spot. Panic gripped Richard's heart as he spent hours searching the surrounding streets, worried that he'd lost his chance to help. Finally, he found Tom huddled in an alley behind a restaurant, protecting himself from the rain that had started to fall. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Richard said, his relief evident in his voice. Tom looked up, surprise flickering across his face. He hadn't expected to see the billionaire again, assuming their coffee meeting had been a one-time act of kindness. I thought that was it, Tom admitted, his voice rough from the cold. People usually buy you a coffee, feel good about themselves, and move on. His honesty struck Richard deeply. How many times had he himself done exactly that, offered small acts of kindness without any real follow-through? I'm not people, Richard replied, helping Tom to his feet. And this isn't charity. I have a proposal for you, but first, let's get you somewhere warm and dry. At the apartment, Tom stood in disbelief, taking in the simple but clean space. His hands trembled as he touched the fresh bedding, the stocked refrigerator, the basic toiletries in the bathroom. But when Richard mentioned that he'd also arranged for a doctor's appointment and new clothes, Tom's pride kicked in. I can't accept all this, he said, backing away from the apartment's warmth. I don't want to be anyone's project or publicity stunt. His words stung, but Richard understood the skepticism. In a world where every act of kindness seemed to end up as a viral video or PR opportunity, Tom's suspicion was warranted. Let me tell you what I see, Richard said, sitting down at the small kitchen table. I see a skilled software engineer who got knocked down by circumstances beyond his control. I see someone who, with the right support system, could be back on his feet, working in tech again. But most importantly, I see myself, if things had gone differently in my life. He laid out his proposal. Tom would have 6 months in the apartment, plus access to therapy, healthcare, and a coding bootcamp to update his skills. In return, Tom would need to commit fully to the program, attend all sessions, and eventually help design a program to help others in similar situations. Why are you really doing this? Tom asked, still suspicious of Richard's motives. Richard thought carefully before answering, knowing that his response needed to be absolutely honest. Because success in this world is often just a matter of luck and timing, he said. I work with hundreds of brilliant people in tech, but I've never met anyone who looks so much like me, who had such a similar path before life threw them a curveball. It feels like I'm being given a chance to prove that talent and determination should matter more than luck. Over the next few weeks, Tom's transformation began, though it wasn't without its challenges. The years on the street had left deep emotional scars. There were nights when the apartment felt too quiet, too enclosed, and Tom would find himself sleeping on the floor rather than the bed. The therapy sessions were particularly difficult, forcing him to confront the grief of losing his wife and the shame of his downfall. But there were victories too. Tom's muscle memory for coding came back quickly in the bootcamp, and his experience from the earlier days of Silicon Valley proved invaluable. He even began helping other students, showing a natural talent for teaching that surprised everyone, including himself. Richard kept his distance during this time, checking in regularly but careful not to hover. He understood that Tom needed to feel in control of his own recovery. However, he couldn't help but share Tom's progress with his board of directors, planting the seeds for a larger initiative he was beginning to envision. As the first month drew to a close, Tom invited Richard over for dinner, a simple meal he'd cooked himself in his new kitchen. As they ate, Tom shared something that would change the direction of their story once again. He'd been developing an idea, a platform that could help connect homeless individuals with resources and opportunities, using his first-hand experience of what was really needed on the streets. Richard listened intently, watching as Tom sketched out his ideas on a napkin, his eyes bright with purpose for the first time since they'd met. In that moment, Richard realized that their chance encounter wasn't just about helping one man get back on his feet, it was about creating a ripple effect that could touch countless lives. But as Tom continued to outline his vision, neither man could have anticipated the obstacles and opposition they would face in trying to bring it to life. Their journey was about to become far more complicated than either of them had imagined. 3 months into Tom's recovery program, his idea for the homeless resource platform was taking shape. He spent countless hours at his laptop, drawing from his own experiences to create something truly revolutionary. But when Richard presented the concept to his company's board of directors, he encountered unexpected resistance. "This isn't what our investors expect from us," argued one board member, frowning at the presentation slides. "We're a tech company, not a charitable organization." Others nodded in agreement, their expressions showing varying degrees of skepticism and disapproval. Richard felt his frustration rising, but kept his voice steady. "This isn't charity," he insisted, using the same words he'd said to Tom months ago. "This is innovation with a purpose. We have a chance to create something that could transform millions of lives." But as he looked around the boardroom, he could see they weren't convinced. One board member even suggested that Richard's judgment was clouded by his personal connection to Tom. Meanwhile, Tom was facing his own battles. As news of his connection to Richard began to spread through Silicon Valley's tight-knit community, whispers and rumors followed. Some suggested he was manipulating Richard's guilt, others claimed it was all an elaborate publicity stunt. The pressure began to affect Tom's recovery, bringing back old anxieties and self-doubts. One rainy evening, Richard found Tom sitting in the dark in his apartment, staring at his laptop screen. "Maybe they're right," Tom said without looking up. "Maybe I'm trying to bite off more than I can chew. I lived on the streets, but that doesn't make me qualified to solve homelessness." Richard pulled up a chair beside him. "Do you remember what you told me last week about the problems with existing homeless support systems?" Tom nodded slowly. "You said they're fragmented, difficult to navigate, and often don't address real needs. You know this because you lived it. That knowledge is invaluable." Tom's platform design reflected this first-hand experience. Unlike existing systems, it would provide real-time information about shelter availability, job opportunities, and medical services. More importantly, it would include a peer support network, connecting people with others who had successfully transitioned off the streets. As they discussed the platform's features, a news alert popped up on Tom's laptop. A local tech blog had published an article questioning Richard's recent business decisions, specifically mentioning his peculiar friendship with a homeless man. The article suggested that shareholders were becoming concerned about the company's direction. Richard's phone began buzzing with messages from his PR team, urging him to distance himself from the situation. But as he watched Tom reading the article, his face growing paler with each paragraph, Richard made a decision that would either save or sink them both. He pulled out his phone and began typing an email to his entire company. It was time to tell their story, the whole story, on their own terms. But first, he needed Tom's permission. "They want to paint this as a scandal," he said. "Let's show them it's actually a wake-up call for the tech industry." Tom looked uncertain. "Going public means everyone will know everything. About my wife, my breakdown, the years on the street." His voice cracked slightly. "Are you sure you want to tie your reputation to someone like me?" Richard's response was immediate. "I want to tie my reputation to someone who never lost his humanity despite losing everything else. To someone who, even after hitting rock bottom, is trying to build something to help others avoid the same fate." Over the next few days, they worked together to craft their message. Tom shared his story in raw, honest detail: the devastating loss of his wife, the crushing medical debt, the slow spiral into homelessness. Richard spoke about their chance encounter and the moment he realized that success in the tech industry often had more to do with luck and privilege than talent alone. They launched their story on multiple platforms simultaneously, accompanied by a detailed proposal for the resource platform. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other tech leaders began sharing similar stories of near misses, times when they'd almost lost everything. Former homeless individuals came forward to offer insights and suggestions for the platform. But the most surprising response came from Richard's own employees. Dozens reached out, asking to volunteer their time and skills to help develop the platform. Engineers, designers, and project managers offered to work extra hours to bring Tom's vision to life. It was a reminder that while boardrooms might be driven by profit margins, many in the tech industry still believed in technology's power to create meaningful change. However, not all the attention was positive. As their story gained traction, it attracted scrutiny from unexpected quarters. Questions began to surface about Tom's past, with some digging into his former life with an intensity that threatened to derail everything they'd built. And in the shadows, powerful figures in the tech industry who felt threatened by this new approach to social innovation were beginning to mobilize against them. Richard and Tom stood at a crossroads. They could either retreat from the public eye and develop the platform quietly, or they could push forward and face the growing opposition head-on. As they sat in Tom's apartment, now covered with wireframes and user journey maps, they knew their next decision would determine not just their own futures, but potentially the futures of countless others who were waiting for someone to give them a second chance. What they didn't know was that their biggest challenge yet was about to emerge from a most unexpected source. The mysterious email contained information that neither Richard nor Tom was prepared for. It came from a woman named Grace, who claimed to be Tom's daughter from his marriage. She had been trying to find her father for years, unaware of his descent into homelessness after her mother's death. She had only recently discovered his story through the media coverage of his partnership with Richard. Tom sat in his apartment, staring at the email for hours. His hands shook as he read and reread the message. "I didn't tell you about her," he finally said to Richard, who had rushed over after receiving his own copy of the email. "After her mother died, I couldn't face her. She was only 19, in her first year of college. I told her to focus on her studies, that I would handle everything. But when everything fell apart..." Richard listened silently as Tom continued. "I stopped answering her calls. I told myself it was better for her not to see what I'd become. Eventually, I convinced myself she was better off without me in her life." His voice cracked with emotion. "I thought I was protecting her, but I was really just protecting myself from facing my own failure as a father." The email threw both men into a crisis of conscience. Their platform was meant to help reconnect homeless individuals with support systems, yet Tom had deliberately disconnected from his own family. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked gently. The question hung in the air between them. "I don't know if I have the right to be in her life anymore," Tom replied. "She's built her own life without me. She's a software developer now, working in Austin. She found me because she recognized some of the coding patterns in the platform's preview, patterns I taught her when she was young." The situation forced both men to confront deeper truths about their mission. They had been so focused on building technological solutions that they'd almost forgotten the human element at the core of homelessness, the broken relationships, the shame, the self-imposed isolation. Richard watched as Tom struggled with his decision. He remembered his own family conflicts, how pride and fear had driven wedges between him and his brother. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the hardest person to forgive is yourself." Over the next few days, Tom drafted and deleted countless replies to Grace's email. Meanwhile, their platform development continued, but Tom's work took on a new dimension. He added features focused on family reconnection, including secure communication channels and support resources for both homeless individuals and their families. "I keep thinking about how many others are out there," Tom explained as he showed Richard the new features. "People who, like me, cut themselves off from family out of shame or pride. People whose families are searching for them but don't know where to start." The media caught wind of Grace's email, and suddenly their story took on a new angle. Some praised Tom's honesty in acknowledging his past mistakes, while others questioned whether someone who had abandoned his own daughter was qualified to help others rebuild their lives. Grace's response to Tom's eventual email was cautious but open. She agreed to a video call, and Richard offered Tom the privacy of his office for the conversation. As Tom sat nervously in front of the computer screen, Richard waited outside, pacing the hallway. When Tom emerged 2 hours later, his eyes were red, but there was a lightness to his shoulders that Richard hadn't seen before. "She wants to be part of the platform development," Tom said, his voice filled with wonder. "She said she wants to help make sure other families don't lose each other the way we did." The addition of Grace to the team brought unexpected benefits. Her fresh perspective and technical expertise helped refine the platform's family reconnection features. More importantly, her presence forced both Tom and Richard to confront their own assumptions about success, failure, and redemption. However, as Grace became more involved in the project, she uncovered something in the platform's early code that raised alarming questions. There were traces of proprietary algorithms that seemed eerily familiar, algorithms that belonged to Richard's company from years ago, back when Tom was still working in tech. The discovery threatened to unravel everything they had built. Had Tom's initial success in tech been built on stolen code? Was this why he had really fallen from grace? Or was there more to the story that even Tom had forgotten during his years on the street? As they stood in Richard's office late one night, staring at Grace's findings on the computer screen, both men realized they were at another crossroads. The truth about their past connection was about to emerge, and it would test their friendship in ways they never imagined. As Grace dug deeper into the code anomaly, a startling truth began to emerge. The algorithms weren't stolen, they were Tom's original work from 15 years ago, when he had been part of a small consulting firm that worked with Richard's company during its startup phase. The truth had been buried in old contracts and forgotten emails, lost to time and circumstance. "I remember now," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared at the old documentation Grace had uncovered. "It was my first major project after graduating. We were hired to develop optimization algorithms for a small startup." He looked at Richard, realization dawning in his eyes. "Your startup?" Richard sat heavily in his office chair, memories flooding back. He had been so focused on building his company back then that he'd barely paid attention to the contractors who helped lay its foundation. "The algorithms were revolutionary," he admitted. "They became the backbone of our early success. But I never knew who actually wrote them." Grace, who had been quietly observing both men, spoke up. "Dad, these algorithms are still being used in some of the most successful tech platforms today. Your work helped shape the entire industry." Her voice carried a mix of pride and sadness. "All those years on the street, and you never knew." The irony of their situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Tom had helped build the very empire that Richard now controlled, yet fate had sent them down dramatically different paths, only to bring them back together in the most unexpected way. But this discovery brought new complications. If word got out that one of the fundamental algorithms powering Richard's multi-billion-dollar company had been created by a man who later ended up homeless, it could raise uncomfortable questions about compensation and credit in the tech industry. "We need to make this right," Richard declared, already pulling up legal documents on his computer. But Tom raised his hand to stop him. "The past is past," Tom said quietly. "What matters now is what we do with this knowledge moving forward." He turned to his daughter. "Grace, can we modify these algorithms to help with our platform's matching system? Use them to connect people with the resources they need most?" Grace's eyes lit up at the challenge. "The basic architecture is perfect for resource allocation. With some modifications, we could create a system that matches homeless individuals with services, housing, and job opportunities more efficiently than anything currently available." Over the next few weeks, father and daughter worked side by side, adapting Tom's original algorithms for their new purpose. Richard watched their collaboration with a mixture of awe and humility, seeing how Grace had inherited her father's brilliant mind for problem solving. The platform's effectiveness improved dramatically with the implementation of the modified algorithms. Success stories began pouring in, people finding housing, reconnecting with family, securing employment. Each success strengthened their resolve to continue despite the ongoing challenges they faced. However, their progress attracted attention from unexpected quarters. A major tech news outlet began investigating the platform's underlying technology, particularly interested in its sophisticated matching system. They were getting dangerously close to uncovering the connection between Tom's past work and Richard's company's success. The three of them met in Richard's office to discuss their options. The room was tense with the weight of their decision. "We could try to keep it quiet," Grace suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't really support this option. "No more hiding," Tom said firmly. "I spent years hiding from my problems, my family, my past. Look where that got me." He turned to Richard. "Whatever happens, people need to know the truth." Richard nodded slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "What if we turn this into an opportunity? Not just to acknowledge the past, but to change the future?" He began outlining a bold plan that would either secure their legacy or destroy everything they'd built. The plan was ambitious. They would publicly acknowledge Tom's contribution to the company's early success and announce a new initiative. The company would commit to identifying and crediting overlooked contributors to the tech industry, particularly those who had fallen on hard times. Furthermore, they would establish a fund to help talented developers who had faced personal hardships rebuild their careers. As they worked late into the night refining the details of their announcement, Grace noticed something else in the old code, a hidden feature that her father had built into the original algorithms, something that could transform their platform in ways none of them had imagined. The hidden feature Grace discovered in her father's original code was a self-learning component that adapted to user behavior patterns, revolutionary for its time and even more valuable now. Tom had built it to help the system understand and respond to changing user needs, but its potential applications for their current platform were far greater than anyone could have imagined. "Dad, this is incredible," Grace explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she explored the code. "You built an early version of adaptive AI before it was even a mainstream concept. With modern computing power, we could use this to predict and prevent homelessness before it happens." Tom leaned forward, watching his daughter work with a mixture of pride and amazement. The algorithm could analyze patterns in financial transactions, medical bills, rental payments, and other data points to identify individuals at risk of becoming homeless. More importantly, it could connect them with preventive resources before their situation became critical. Richard, who had been quietly observing, suddenly straightened in his chair. "This changes everything," he said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "We're not just helping people after they become homeless, we could stop it from happening in the first place." The implications were staggering. The platform could become not just a resource for those already on the streets, but a preventive tool for communities nationwide. However, implementing such a system would require cooperation from banks, healthcare providers, and government agencies, partnerships that would be challenging to secure. As they began reaching out to potential partners, they encountered an unexpected ally in David, Richard's brother. After his coffee shop meeting with Tom, David had been quietly researching homelessness prevention programs through his investment firm. Now, he saw an opportunity to make a real difference. "The private sector has been looking at this problem the wrong way," David admitted during a strategy meeting. "We've been treating homelessness as an inevitable social issue rather than a preventable crisis. This system could change that perspective." With David's support, doors began to open. Banks were interested in the potential to help their customers avoid financial catastrophe. Healthcare providers saw an opportunity to address the social determinants of health. Government agencies recognized the potential cost savings in prevention versus crisis management. However, as their vision grew, so did the opposition. Privacy advocates raised concerns about data collection and monitoring. Some social service organizations worried about the automation of human services. And competitors in the tech industry began developing their own versions of the system, threatening to fragment the very solution they were trying to create. The turning point came from an unexpected source, the homeless community itself. Tom had insisted on presenting their plan to various homeless advocacy groups, believing their buy-in was crucial for success. During one such presentation, an advocate named Ray stood up to speak. "I've been working with homeless folks for 20 years, Ray said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The biggest problem isn't that we don't know who's at risk, it's that people don't ask for help until it's too late. Pride, shame, denial, these are the real barriers. But coming from someone who's been there?" He gestured to Tom. "That changes everything." Ray's words sparked an idea. They modified the platform to include a mentorship component, connecting individuals at risk of homelessness with those who had successfully navigated similar challenges. Tom's story became not just an inspiration but a model for the program. Grace added another dimension to the system, creating a feature that helped people rebuild their digital identity, something she wished had existed when searching for her father. "Homelessness doesn't just take your home," she explained during a presentation to potential partners. "It takes your whole identity. We're not just preventing homelessness, we're preserving human dignity." The project was gaining momentum, but Tom found himself struggling with an unexpected personal challenge. As the platform's success grew, he started receiving invitations to speak at conferences and meet with business leaders, people who had been his peers before his downfall. The prospect of facing that world again brought back waves of anxiety and self-doubt. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of presentations, Tom stood at the window of his apartment, looking out at the city lights. Richard and Grace sat quietly behind him, waiting. "When I was on the streets," Tom finally said, "I used to look up at these buildings and feel like they were from another world, a world I'd lost the right to be part of. Now here I am, back in that world, but with a completely different perspective." He turned to face them. "Maybe that's what this has all been about. Not just preventing homelessness, but bridging these two worlds that never truly understood each other." As they sat together, discussing their next steps, Grace's laptop chimed with an alert. The system had just identified its first major success case, preventing a family in Chicago from losing their home through early intervention and support. It was working, just as they had hoped. But as they celebrated this small victory, none of them could have predicted the global crisis that was about to test their system, and their relationships, in ways they never imagined. The global crisis arrived in the form of an unprecedented economic downturn that sent shockwaves through the world's financial markets. Major companies began laying off thousands of workers, and housing markets in major cities teetered on the brink of collapse. The potential for a massive surge in homelessness loomed on the horizon. Tom's system began lighting up with alerts across the country. Thousands of families were suddenly at risk, their safety nets crumbling under the economic pressure. The platform they'd built was about to face its greatest test, not in a controlled rollout, but in a full-scale emergency response. "We're seeing a 500% increase in risk indicators," Grace reported during an emergency meeting. The conference room was filled with tension as their team watched the numbers climb on the main screen. "The system is identifying patterns similar to what Dad experienced: medical bills, job losses, mortgage defaults, but on a massive scale." Richard stood at the window, reminiscent of that first morning when he'd spotted Tom on the street. "We built this system to prevent individual tragedies," he said, turning to face the room. "Now we need to scale it to prevent a national one." They worked around the clock, adapting the platform to handle the increased load. Tom's original algorithm proved remarkably robust, its self-learning capabilities helping to identify and prioritize the most urgent cases. David, now fully committed to their cause, leveraged his banking connections to create emergency financial assistance programs. But it was Grace who provided the breakthrough they needed. "We're thinking too linearly," she said one night, after most of the team had gone home. "We're trying to help people individually, but what if we connected them to each other? She showed them how communities facing similar challenges could pool resources, share information, and support one another through the crisis. The idea transformed their approach. Instead of just matching people with resources, they began creating community resilience networks. People who were at risk of losing their homes were connected with others in similar situations, as well as with those who had successfully navigated past crises. The platform became not just a prevention tool, but a community builder. Tom took a leading role in these community networks, sharing his story and teaching others how to use their experiences to help others. "When I was on the streets," he told one group, "I thought I was alone. That was the biggest lie I told myself. None of us are alone in this." The media attention shifted from focusing on Richard and Tom's unusual friendship to covering the communities being built through their platform. Success stories began emerging, neighborhoods organizing to prevent evictions, communities creating shared resource networks, people helping people in ways that went beyond what any algorithm could facilitate. Richard's company board, which had once opposed the project, now saw it as their most valuable asset. The platform was proving that technology could do more than generate profits, it could create genuine social change. Other companies began approaching them about implementing similar systems in their own communities. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. During a national conference on homelessness prevention, a woman approached Tom after his keynote speech. She introduced herself as his former neighbor from the time before his life fell apart. "I watched you disappear," she said, tears in her eyes. "We all did. None of us knew how to help, or maybe we were too afraid to try. But what you've built here, it's giving people like me a way to help before it's too late." That evening, Tom, Richard, and Grace sat in the same coffee shop where the story had begun. The place had become their unofficial meeting spot, a reminder of how far they'd come. Grace was showing them the latest platform statistics on her laptop: over 100,000 families helped, countless more connected through community networks. "You know what I've realized?" Tom said, looking between his daughter and his friend. "That morning when you found me, Richard, it wasn't just about two people who looked alike. It was about seeing yourself in someone else, really seeing them, and choosing to act on that connection." Richard nodded, remembering that morning that felt like a lifetime ago. And now thousands of people are doing the same thing through the platform. Seeing themselves in others, reaching out, making connections. "The algorithm helps," Grace added, "but it's the human connections that make it work. The technology just makes those connections possible." As they sat there, Tom's phone buzzed with a notification. The platform had just prevented its millionth case of potential homelessness. But more importantly, it had created a network of communities that would continue to grow and support each other long into the future. The story of the billionaire and his homeless double had evolved into something much bigger than either of them had imagined. It wasn't just about two men who looked alike, or about technology preventing homelessness. It was about the power of human connection, the importance of second chances, and the truth that success means nothing if we can't use it to lift others up. Outside the coffee shop window, the city streets were filled with people heading home for the evening. But thanks to their work, more of those people had homes to return to, communities to rely on, and hope for the future. The mirror that had first brought them together had become a window, showing them, and the world, a better way forward. And somewhere in those streets, another story of connection and transformation was waiting to begin.